it should be good to go.
Great. Hi, everybody. I don't have an agenda other than checking in and kind of figuring out next steps. I have kind of not had a clear sense of how to move forward with this committee since the things with the city are a lot of unknown factors, and then finding out just the information that like Dennis collected, it made me feel quite uncertain about even what I personally think would be a recommendation. So I apologize for not having strong leadership in this group. Should we just go around and do updates and checking in? Do you want to, I know I missed that meeting yesterday or whenever it was.
Yeah. Actually, what I was going to ask is if Dennis would refresh us on what you're referring to there, because I'm a little bit, I need to backtrack.
And you're muted, Dennis.
I'm not 100% sure which parts. I mean, part of what I did was some anecdotal conversations with people in the industry, and that was sort of a mixed bag. And I only got a few people who actually returned calls. And
the building industry.
Yeah, I'm from HVAC people.
Oh, okay.
From specifically heating and cooling contractors. And, you know, they're seeing a significant increase in heat pumps. We'll see more of that after legislative action that's going to make that affordable for more people. But they're installing them and people are leaving their furnaces, or people are looking at biofuel systems. And they had a critique that's something that I don't know where we go with that, of that the EWEB program for ducted electric systems was more work bureaucratically than they felt. This was one particular individual, but that the rebates on the split heat pumps, they're easy and straightforward for consumers to do. But for ducted systems, which is people who already have a ducted system might want to transition that way and really be able to cover, you know, every room in their house, rather than, you know, the realities of splits. Sometimes you end up with some cool corners. You know, like we have a downstairs room in our house that has a supplemental electric heater, and we've got radiant in our floors because the heat pump outlets don't reach everywhere from a split system. So I don't know if we say anything to EWEB when that we've heard, you know, if it's appropriate for us to make comment to that agency. Was the only thought that came out of those conversations. It was kind of like the, you know, the piece that we got public testimony sent to us of somebody who was talking, you know, dual fuel system. And so that's the one piece. And then the data around, you know, housing starts and how much is being done. That's a pretty comprehensive report to try to figure out, you know, what do we want to pull out of that. And I forwarded some stuff about the report from the Envision Eugene that I serve on the technical advisory committee on, that's going to the planning commission this week. That really its primary focus is on the overall housing shortfall, in the sense that, I mean, that report estimates that Eugene is 10,000 units short of what should be there.
Geez, with all of the new apartment buildings, that's so hard for me to believe. I don't get it.
Right. Well, what came out of that discussion is those are student apartments primarily, the big ones.
Yeah.
And so they only have a secondary impact in taking students out of the larger market, but they're marketing to a certain slice of the market. The other piece that was a big takeaway for me in that report, which I spent weeks learning about what, you know, incentives and stuff look like. And they would say, you know, you're here to tell us what this report is, this report readable to a lay person. And it was a bunch of people who, like, you know, head of Associated General Contractors and Sue Pritchard, who's dealt with real estate planning stuff for decades, and me and these other folks that knew what was going on. And I'd say, if you want a lay person who doesn't know about this, I'll be that, you know, so that ended up my role. but was about the increased costs, which are amazing. Like it's nearly 200% over the last 9 years in terms of housing sale costs, with comparable increases in rental costs. And the vacancy rate, even with all those new apartments, is still far lower than helps have a good, marketplace financially. I mean, far higher, far lower. A higher vacancy rate, 7 to 9%, is kind of typical for the market, and we're at like 4. And that's why rents are expensive. Housing expensive. The other personal one is one of the greatest concentrations of undeveloped land within the urban growth boundary is around my house, which is not surprising as I look out my window at about 8 acres of undeveloped land. Well, let's see, there's 2 over there, there's 10, there's 2 more over there, there's 12. A lot of undeveloped land that's outside my back window in the Laurel Hill Valley is like just waiting for the people who own it to say, we're ready.
You know who owns it, right?
Yeah, I know who owns it. It's a bunch of it as well. And the piece across the road is another small acreage, right? Which her boss owns across the road from me.
Who owns it?
He lives across the street from Josh Proudfoot, who presented to the commission last month as the founder of Good Company.
Yeah. Right, but a neighbor next, out of state owners own the one next door, just sold, and they don't have any development. The one beyond that is 6 acres that belongs to a contractor who's already gotten approval to put 20 houses in there. And it's only a matter of when he decides to do it. The others are, 2 acres some friends of my own, and 4 acres some other friends own, who don't plan to develop, and they're my age cohort, so it'll probably not be developed in my lifetime. But it's this funny little island. So there's islands of developable land left. And
so the thing that that struck me was about, because we had been talking about how industrial are a potential challenge, like in many of the communities in California that have encouraged or required electrification, they have had a few exemptions for certain industries. And the way Eugene was going would have, the easy way, putting the health and safety code wouldn't allow for any exemptions whatsoever. And so kind of our questions were, one, are there any new industrial users? Because if there aren't, then it doesn't matter. But then
there didn't seem to be any pending at this point. And there's a lot of land that's still potentially available for industrial users. And there's not a lot of people knocking at the door. In fact, I think one of the things that we were specifically said, we're not there to look at policy, that might be a takeaway from that is maybe some of that land that was designated for primarily commercial or industrial might be redesignated as for density. I mean, for housing. And because they found out a lot of the property that's being developed for those new big apartments we're seeing it was zoned commercial. And you can do, apartments on commercial. And that's what a lot of those big apartments, particularly on Franklin, restaurants went out to build apartments building. So I think that's the key piece that policymakers might look at is within the urban growth boundary, where residentially zoned land is starting to get a little scarcer. Might they look at redesignating some of the commercial land? But that's a zoning thing, and I don't know where we go with that, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a recommendation, possibly.
But the key piece that struck me in earlier conversations was that whole biofuel question. And is it appropriate for us to make comment to EWIP?
Well, I would think we would have to look into that a little bit further before I would be ready to make a comment, just because, somebody said that, we'd have to check it out a little bit more.
Right.
Dan, do you want to update from the meeting the other day?
Sure. So, yes, I did attend the local government advisory council meeting, I guess it's called, with the chamber. And yesterday morning, And it's a pretty big group. I don't know, 20 people, something like that, representing a lot of different members of the chamber. And Lydia Bishop, who's leading the staff effort on the presentation that's going to council next week, was the presenter.
She represents the chamber?
No, she's a city staff person.
Okay.
She's, I think, the building and permit services division manager for the city. And she's the lead on the presentation to council this coming week, I think it is, or is it? Yeah.
And what is the presentation to council?
On Wednesday regarding electrification, so she presented, and then I think, let's see what I can try to summarize here. She was really talking about what she is going to present, and that they've really taken a very not policy oriented approach, but just technically, how can you do this? And some of the things that Laura was referring to that we've heard otherwise, which is, if you you want to try to stay away from things that, or exceptions that would touch on the state building code, because if you do, then it gets infinitely more complicated. And that the kinds of issues that the members of the committee were raising. First of all, just an observation, I found it was interesting that we haven't had any information come to the Sustainability Commission yet about this, and yet the chamber was having a presentation from a staff person. I'm sure they sought it out, and maybe we could have done something similar, but it just still feels like our communication with the city and staff is not very very connected right now. There were all kinds of issues. I would say virtually none of the members of the committee were in support of the council measures as they stand right now. And they had all kinds of things. Economic development, what would be the effect on jobs? What would be the effect on business? It would be terrible. Businesses will move, they won't stay here, they'll go somewhere else, they won't come here. Let's see. One person said, as far as he knew, all the building trades have stated that it would be helpful not to have individual jurisdictions make changes, that changes like this should be made statewide. What consideration has been given to what the effect will be on jobs in Eugene is another person. And they kept asking Lydia how, who's addressing these policy issues, which was basically nobody really is right now. So they're just saying, if you do this or if you do that. So seems like they fully expect that, and even we're saying that. That was one of the other issues, was there hasn't really been any public process. There hasn't been any opportunity for people to comment or get involved in how this would be shaped here. And so there needs to be more than just a public hearing. There needs to be some additional public process around that. There will be no staff recommendation regarding this. It's just, again, presenting, here's what happens if you do this, and here's what happens if you do this. How do we want to engage a public process? Why this timeline? That, who decided the timeline is very quick to try to do something as of January 2023. Let me just look here. There was some, Phil Barnhart was attending. He's not a member of the committee, but he was attending, and it was good because I think he was pretty much the only one who spoke up and said, if we allow people to put in this gas infrastructure, somebody should be thinking about the economic impact of that, because in 10 years, we're going to have to be telling people to shut it down because of what's happening with the climate. We're just not going to be able to continue it. And it doesn't make sense to put in this infrastructure, and people should be looking at that. And a couple of us threw in some comments on the chat to say, you know, of course there are issues that people need to figure out, but is anybody acknowledging that, you know, there are climate realities and things that need to be addressed? And Lydia did point out a couple times that this was really coming from, it wasn't just like out of the blue from the council, somebody's idea, but this is coming out of the climate action plan that's been going on for some time, and you know, we need to do something about it. There was an observation that it's already affecting development because some people are waiting to see what happens. I think that's kind of when Phil jumped in. Anyway, the upshot was they encouraged their members to start contacting council with their concerns and to show up at the public hearing, or the public forum on Monday night. And I fully expect that that's all happening.
Jan, could you say who these people are? Do you know what businesses they represent?
I have a list that I tried to scribble down as they were introducing themselves, and now I can run down it. Like I said, there's a lot of people. I think that that's important. I think we need to be looking for business people who have a more balanced view, maybe. Liz Kaywood was the chair of the committee. She's a retired public relations person. John Borofsky was there. He's been involved in city politics on the budget committee and other committees. He's the Johnny of Beppe and Johnny's restaurant.
Yeah, and he's on the Envision Eugene Advisory Group.
Right.
Very outspoken guy.
Somebody named Brian Steffler, I think, from US Bank. Carol Shermer, who is like a planning consultant. Somebody from the U of O, and I didn't catch who that was. Gary Wildish, who's a longtime, you know, Eugene business person, who actually was was one of the few people who had anything to say about, hey, we really can't be just against anything that's we've got to work on the climate stuff. And he's surprised a little bit. Somebody named Jonathan Riddle, somebody named something Roscoe, Jim Ralph from The Shed, somebody from Cardinal Services, a guy named Aaron, somebody from Cardinal Services, Marcia Edwards, who's a realtor, Sherry Schaefer, who I think is insurance, Brian Erickson, who's Chambers Construction, Brittany Quick Warner, somebody formerly from Mercedes-Benz, I think, Sean Ritchie Jewelers, Geneva Ralph, also with The Shed, Will Fitzsimmons, who's a staff person for the chamber. Somebody from the Springfield Chamber was sitting in. I think there was a person from Northwest Natural there, but I don't think he spoke. Janine Parisi tuned in from eWeb. Jim New tuned in, and Peter Dragovich, and somebody from LTD. That's what I have. So, yeah.
Do you have a sense when we talk about this? So what is staff going to present to council as the options? Because that's part of the piece that we still haven't heard, is what is council going to be, what is staff suggesting to council that they might do that's not, messing with state building code? Are they looking at health and safety side of it? Because that's the authority.
I think so. It wasn't clear to me, but actually the staff agenda item summary should be posted as of tomorrow, I think, which will, we can see the written version at that point.
When I spoke to Lydia Bishop, that's what she said they were doing, that they were going to, because it's the most straightforward pathway, and then they can talk about the building code, which is not straightforward.
And I had actually got the impression that Lydia said she was meeting with Sarah Maderi, the city manager, later in the day or the next day or something, and was going to kind of go over all this stuff, and that they might be even adding or modifying what they were going to be saying based on some of the concerns that they were hearing. I don't know. I'm not sure, but it sounded a little like that.
The power this group has.
Of course. So I guess even before I attended this meeting, what I was thinking and hoping that this group could do would be to provide some input to the council, some support to them in some way. And we just haven't really had enough time to figure out enough really what the picture is to do that very much, I don't think. But I think if we're of a mind that we support the move toward electrification, maybe not by the time, you know, this week, but it sounds like this process is going to go on for some time. Maybe even after we hear the comments on Monday and the presentation on Wednesday, maybe we'll be in a better situation to try to figure out what we think our point of view should be, and come up with some kind of a position statement or something like that, and some other, or perhaps some other work that we could do to help support. I don't know. I'm actually on tap through my work with 350 to make some public comment on Monday night, which I'm a little nervous about. Under the circumstances, I didn't expect to be like a big focal point in this particular meeting, but so it is. I didn't really think about the timing. So one question I have for the group is, I guess we don't have any position as a commissioner or even as a committee at this point. So I probably may identify myself as on the Sustainability Commission, but speaking my own, you know, personal views.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Which
so-
I guess I would say at this point, my personal views are that it's, you know, it's just imperative that we have to start making some progress. And this is one way that we can actually do that, and one way that the city can do it. And there certainly may be issues that need to be addressed. And I actually personally I'm kind of supportive of the idea of a more public process, but I don't want it to get totally bogged down. But we, you know, we do have to reach out, and they have to devote some resources to being able to do that. But we do need to get people involved and get people on board one way or another. But we still have to just keep moving ahead. And so.
Right. Well, and the thing
before Dennis, Louisa hasn't got to speak yet, so I wanted to.
all right, thank you.
I just, first, is there like a television on in the background in somebody's house? I just keep hearing this background noise. It's really distracting.
There is in my house, and I could go upstairs, but I have my headphones on, so I'll mute.
Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry, it's just hard to focus. I wanted to ask Jan about what Lydia Bishop was presenting from the technical perspective. Is it a ban on new accounts only? Sorry, you are on mute.
Sorry, we have open space in this house, and it's hard to separate the sound unless I go upstairs. Honestly, I was a little confused because I thought that her presentation was going to be primarily about the first ordinance, which has just to do with new residential, right?
Okay.
But it didn't sound like that. She said it was about a code path to make all new buildings electric.
Okay, great. That's helpful. So
Okay.
one of the things I wanted to flag for the group was Laura and I attended a informal work session with Councillor Surratt and Councillor Groves about the concept of a public health overlay zone, and coming specifically in response to legacy toxic industries that are in Eugene. Also coming up during that conversation was the need for fossil fuel risk bonds and the hazards presented to public health by these legacy industries and the fuel storage and movement through the community. And so I was curious, Laura, what you thought about that outcome of that conversation as it impacts the conversation around new natural gas infrastructure and its recent studies that have come out showing the human health hazards from having natural gas in your home and its high leakage rates, NOx specifically. and the risks associated with natural gas in terms of the fossil fuel risk bond conversation, and if there's a way that these things actually thread together.
Yeah, I think they're kind of both and. I don't think they can replace each other.
Nope, I'm just saying include.
Include.
Bring this conversation, the electrification conversation, into the public health overlay zone conversation.
Huh. I hadn't thought of that. So if this goes into the local health and safety code, that's why it wouldn't just be residential, it would be for anything, because it's in the health and safety code, the electrification for new construction.
I mean, it wasn't brought up directly. It was, but it seems to me to have a lot of similar implications around, fossil fuel movement risks from storage and human health impacts from, fossil fuel infrastructure. Those things all touch on this topic. And so I was curious if there was an opportunity to sort of connect for the counselors through this committee, the links that we maybe could pull together around that. And just, I guess I was just looking for your initial thoughts on that concept, or everyone else.
I could say, I think for like new developments, but if it's like if it's like infill, because the overlay zone is going to be like a map on top of it's like a drawn map. So if you're doing like little infills, I don't know how that would work. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think generally, Louisa, the sense you've got, because they're not going to be able to do much around code issues, it might be a direction we take depending on how things play out from the stuff that's coming up next week as to what staff's actually going to recommend, and we get a feel for how the council is about whatever they're bringing. That's the frustration that I have is, what this will be. Well, we haven't heard from staff what this that they're recommending to council is.
Well, they were clear they were not making a recommendation. They were presenting information.
But what are the alternatives that they're offering to council as possible pathways? And so we don't know what of those pathways might resonate with the counselors who have been big advocates for a ban, to figure out what direction it might go. And I don't remember what meeting it's at, and Louisa, it may have been something you bring up, or it may have been one of the Safe Cities groups I've been gathering with. Some municipalities have put limitations on emissions of what a heating system will create as the criteria of whether or not it's allowable.
Yeah, that's what New York City is working, or New York is working.
Yeah, I think I heard it from you in the first place. And so that's kind of what I hear from what you're saying. And depending on what comes out of next week's version might be sort of a plan B direction to go, to approach it from that angle. Is that sort of what you're hinting at, Louisa?
Well, I guess I'm just curious, because it does feel like so much of the work that we're doing has these strong threads that connect them together. And I don't want to unnecessarily isolate and silo the work that we're doing, when in fact we can sort of build on our previous recommendations and sort of see how these things might fit together. I'm also, of course, council is waiting for the results from the electrification study, that the decarbonization study that we were presented last month. And so we haven't gotten that work is directly connected to this committee, and we haven't actually gotten a chance to kind of debrief that study. I know it was a very open-ended and mostly about our feedback, but that is going to have a big part in what the council is considering, because of course that study was commissioned by the city itself. So I'm sure that these policy direction options that are coming next week and the results of that study, which are coming in June, will formulate for council a lot of what you're asking for, Dennis, which is, what is this policy going to look like? And I definitely agree that a letter of support makes a lot of sense. Is it a letter of support for the concept writ large? I don't know if that's necessary, I think, but is it, or do we, try to share with them some ideas around the connectivity, the connective tissue between these concepts that maybe they're not thinking about because they're seeing this one piece in front of them. But I'm sure that, it might be worth having a conversation with Councillor Surratt or Groves around these two concepts and how they might fit together.
Are you thinking like if it was emissions, if instead of not allowing hookups, if it was not allowing emissions, internal emissions in the home, which would target heating and cooking?
And stoves.
Yeah, so stoves and heat sources. So then that could be in the health overlay, and it would be a little bit of a modification to that concept because it would be in like any building, no matter where it is. But it definitely is health. So
Sure.
it could just overlay the whole city. I don't know.
Yeah, I won't claim to be an expert. I just wanted to bring those together because it kept coming up for me as I was listening to that presentation that, of course, the infrastructure, we don't want to add new natural. I mean, so to be fair, Northwest Natural has been mandated by state law to reduce their emissions 90% by 2050. So
aren't they suing right now? They're suing the state about that.
I don't
Yeah,
have any.
yeah,
anything
there
to say about that.
there is litigation moving against the whole plan.
By them and other fossil fuel companies.
Mm-hmm. So, the expectation for supply side and demand side reductions in emissions, are at least for now framed by law. And so but that's, what we've been thinking about is 2050 is how long does an appliance last in a residence? How many times will you be switching an appliance between now and then, which is one of the things that I think Josh Proudfoot brought up last month about, new accounts versus electrification of existing buildings. And what does that look like? And does that mean removing infrastructure? Not necessarily. What is the biggest bang for the buck in terms of emissions reductions in the shortest amount of time, which is the urgency is this decade to really start making that impact. And I think that, to answer your question, Dennis, I think that's a lot of what the council has been hearing is the urgency is right now. And so the time to ramp down is very, very short to stave off the worst impacts of climate change, as you all know. So I just had a lot of hope in the public health overlay zone being a kind of a broad stroke opportunity that might avoid the pitfalls of state building code drama.
Louisa, do you want to, we could ask Lisa if she wanted, Lisa Arkin from Beyond Toxics, who spearheaded the overlay zone, if she would be willing to meet with maybe some of us and maybe Councillor Groves and talk about it, or maybe we could just have an informal talk with her to see what she thinks.
Sure.
Do that.
We just have to be cautious about that informal talks and public meeting law and that stuff. So.
Yeah.
So, I mean, part of it is just to have a conversation with her in a formal way and, and then it does the public notice. And most of the time, there's not very many people who show up for these, meetings. It just means that staff needs to post it publicly and, on our website.
It's there, the Beyond Toxics was the ones who kind of started it. So we would be seeing if they're interested in the.
Absolutely. And, she was on the Envision Eugene committee and I've done some other work with her. So yeah, it would be good. It would be a good partner if they think that's something that makes sense to look at as a advisory group to the council, which is who we are.
And if we were to ever at any point make recommendations, it would be super helpful to have notes on the meetings that we've attended and some of these high level takeaways for them. I was just looking in the drive before my internet went out. And so if you are capturing any, dates, types of meetings that you're attending, types of folks who attended, the high level kind of a couple bullet points of what those outcomes are, whatever our final recommendation is, should be informed by those conversations. And so I think we just, if we can keep fairly good track of those notes so that we can include them in whatever the final recommendation is, to show that we've, done our due diligence.
Sounds good. So I want to, we have about 25 more minutes. I had a thought just for the way this group is moving forward. We did a lot of research. We're still like in an unknown situation because this presentation hasn't happened. So I think it is best for us to kind of wait and see. But one idea I wanted to put out there was maybe focusing on talking with the chamber. And since we know some of their concerns have been made semi-public in that meeting you attended, Jan, and so I'm imagining somebody has done a study in California on the cities pre and post their electrification ordinances, looking at the economic impacts in other communities. And that might be good, like actual hard data to share with them of what happens.
I think that would be really interesting. I mean, but how long have those been in effect? But to note, and I think one thing is true is that in California there is more of a concentration of cities, so it's not so much like we're the only ones and nobody around us would have similar rules. I still think it would be helpful. I do think any kind of data that we can bring to the table would be helpful. That it was a question that I had for probably you, Laura, and Louisa. Did you hear one of the things that Samantha mentioned when I talked with her prior to the chamber meeting was that there had been some, I'm looking for some, she called it benchmarking done by Good Company that was work that had been commissioned, but has never really come out partly because of the change of staff and the whole disruption to the program. But there was some stuff still that it's some work that's sitting somewhere that hasn't come out yet. Does that ring any bells with you at all? To what that might be referring to? I can talk to her again about and get a little more clarity about that. Should be part of the consideration. Josh or Aaron had worked on. Chelsea had received the information, but then, then the whole thing.
Well, I mean, the only thing I can say confidently is that, as a primary supporter of the annual greenhouse gas inventories for the city of Eugene, natural gas associated emissions are part of that. So I don't know if that's the benchmarking that she's referring to, but I definitely is an opportunity to talk to Matt Rodriguez and the new staff supporting the sustainability program about access to those materials. I myself don't work on any City of Eugene projects in order to prevent conflict of interest.
Do other people have thoughts of how this group can move forward? We should meet again after the work session next week, but do we want to make a plan for other things? Like, I'm happy to gather data on if there's any economic studies done in California. Any other ideas you all are having?
I think, Laura, you had a good summary in the sense that the timing of both the lack of staffing and us not hearing before chamber heard even what's on the proposed agenda that goes to the council is a tough timing issue for us to do much. I like the notion of maybe having a conversation with Lisa Arkin. Would be valuable. And other than that, I think we kind of wait to see what is potentially moving forward. And if health and safety is brought up at that level, we certainly are in a basis to explore it further. The other thing I want to say before we wrap up, Laura, I am way extroverted, so I appreciate meeting facilitators who rein me in a bit. So anybody in this virtual room, don't hesitate to do that with Dennis. Dennis needs that help sometimes. I try to self-rein myself in, but I got a little carried away. I'm off the charts on Myers-Briggs for the record. So.
Well, I can follow up with Lacey and Matt or Brian and see if I can, and maybe with Sam as well, and make sure I understand what she was referring to and follow up on what that work was and where that stands anyway.
Laura, are you interested to reach out to Lisa, or do you want support to do that?
I can reach out to her and I'll CC you so we can just all be in the loop.
Sure, thanks. And then, yeah, I do feel like it's kind of a little bit of a wait and see, but what would be nice is if we had the bones of concepts. You know, it's, for me, it's really helpful to have stuff written down and sort of like ideas evolving on paper somewhere, so that when it is time to make a recommendation or send a letter in a timely way, we're not starting from scratch. So in any capacity that people can use the drive or other methods by which to track their conversations, that would be helpful.
Are we done early?
Oh, I still got sunshine. I could go out and dig some more weeds.
Yeah.
There you go. When would we like to think about meeting again? I'm going to be pretty busy through the next couple of weeks, but after that, maybe we should not wait a whole month, or maybe we should, I don't know. What do you think?
So next week is the presentation to council, and
Right.
that will be
Right.
recorded. So if you can't go to it live, if we could all try to watch that or be
For
there
sure.
live.
Absolutely.
Could we meet the week after that to have that digest a little bit? That would be.
I guess I'll be back.
Like maybe in 2 weeks, so the 21st at the same time.
That'll be all right with me.
Would that work? Yeah.
I
Dennis,
think so.
I don't know if you're talking to us. You're muted, Dennis.
Well, with Lacey here, you know, and we can just ask Lacey to go ahead and schedule that for the 21st with public notice and such. And one of the things is potentially, if Lisa's available, to begin a conversation with her then.
Yeah, I mean, I think just for respecting everybody's time, we could kind of get the ground, see what's possible, and not have her come, because we want to debrief the council work session with our group. But we can tell her we're meeting, but I think we would want to save that time for us to talk about what we heard and how we want to move forward.
I am happy to get a meeting public noticed and set up on Zoom for April 21st from 6 to 7.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
you're welcome.
I think we're done.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.